In this video, I'm going to be building the ultimate gaming PC, based around an RTX 4090 and a Ryzen 7 7800X3D. Is this the most powerful CPU and GPU combo ever made for gaming? I suppose there's only really one way to find out. I'll be walking you through how to build an awesome system with these two components, taking a detailed dive into performance later on, and hopefully having some fun along the way. Let's do this. The Corsair Xeneon 32-inch gaming monitor is a panel that packs a punch, bringing your games and media to life on a vibrant, ultra-slim 32-inch IPS 4K display. It's a panel with some power. What's more, the fast 144Hz refresh rate and nippy 1 millisecond response time ensure you can keep a competitive edge. Learn more about the Xeneon 32 UHD 144 at the first links in the description below, and buy now on the Corsair web store. I've got to give a shout out to the guys over at ASUS for sending over the case and a couple of other bits. I already had the TUF 4090 and thought, why not roll with that theme throughout the whole build today? Now let me start, shall I, by looking at the CPU and GPU first. AMD's Ryzen 7 7800X3D is almost a bit of a diamond in the rough of their X3D architecture. While the other X3D chips were good, they weren't necessarily sensational. This, however, is. You're going to see a solid double-digit percentage performance increase in gaming performance over the 7800 non-X3D, which AMD of course achieved by layering up that expensive cache. That's why this chip is well worth the price premium over its non-X3D brother. It pairs up perfectly with the 4090, undoubtedly the most powerful gaming GPU on the market. Of course, if you went for an AMD card, you could take advantage of their smart access memory, but the 4090 is so good, the 7900 XTX, frankly, doesn't stand a chance. In terms of other components, I'll be installing the CPU, memory, and the SSD into this motherboard, ASUS's TUF Gaming X670E+. Now, while this build is always intended to be high-end, hence I've gone for the top-end X670E chipset, it isn't necessarily a license to print money. After all, what's the point in a gaming PC build guide if the only criteria is most expensive as opposed to actually performs well? You still get decent VRM power delivery on this board, allowing us to overclock the 7800X3D, a chip that, while it's got some legroom, you're not going to be able to push mega far anyway. Of course, the new AMD processors install slightly differently, so pay attention if you've not seen this before. What I'm going to do is undo the arm on the socket, lift the socket cover upwards, and drop the Ryzen chip into place. Previously, I wouldn't have recommended this, but now you can give it a small wiggle, make sure it's seated properly before returning the cover, adding the arm in, and fastening it down. It's kind of like an Intel socket where you have got to apply pressure, but not force. In terms of other components, I'll be popping in a 32GB kit of Thermaltake ToughRAM. Obviously, I've taken the tough theme of this build slightly too far by finding a product from a competitor brand that sort of has tough in the name. I also went for it because the black and grey aesthetic fits literally perfectly with the build today. I think Thermaltake's ToughRAM memory is pretty unique in that it doesn't really look like any other kit on the market. You still obviously get all that nice RGB implementation, but the two-tone design fits exactly with what I was going for in this build today. It also, rather coincidentally, installs into the grey RAM slots to give us, of course, that dual-channel performance. Storage-wise, I've got a 2TB Samsung SSD 990 Pro, one of the best NVMe drives on the market, and of course ensures no bottlenecking from the storage side for the CPU or the graphics card. Very, very important. It's going to pop into the top PCIe Gen 5 slot, but of course any of the other slots, Gen 5 or Gen 4, will do. Before moving on to the next stage, I am going to take a look at the CPU cooler, another ASUS component. It's not one of their TUF range, but it is from their Ryuo lineup of coolers, which are pretty well reviewed. Inside, you get a credit card. Probably not any money on there. And of course, the fans for the cooler. So we've got 1, 2, 3, all individually wrapped and all addressable RGB. You'll also find this quite nicely packaged up 360mm radiator. I'm guessing this is like an Acertech design. Wow, very well wrapped. Removed the hex protection caps before startup. What on earth does that mean? Okay, and then we've got this very fancy, look at that, very fancy pump. Quite a tall pump. I'm guessing that's probably to do with the ASUS patents from what I understand. But yeah, that looks pretty good. Now, I'm not often one to refer to the manual, but I think in this occasion, it's probably a good idea. So let's see. How do we install this for AMD? Page 12. These are the AMD brackets. So they install that way, and then the little screw threads that are on them are what the cooler fastens down to later. To take off the stock mounted hardware, then these go on like so. Gives you a little arrow to tell you the CPU is going to be that way. So you've got one on the bottom, one on the top, and also includes some screws that will, in theory, fasten these plastic brackets into place. Yeah, that makes sense. Actually, to be fair, never ever seen that before. So far, I'm a fan. Now, this is ASUS's brand new GT502, and to say that it resembles some ideas from the likes of the Lian Li 011D, maybe like the Height Y60 and dating even back the Corsair Obsidian Square something or other, would probably be true. It's a fairly generic dual chamber design, but one that apparently boasts support for three 360mm rads, 13 120mm fans, and of course a separate area at the back for your hard drive, power supply, cable management, all of that jazz. So let me remove this and see kind of what we're working with. Hello there. Okay, this has got some handles on it, which I'm going to leverage. I'm hoping that ASUS made these handles to be strong. Yes. Whoa. Okay, that is actually pretty cool. I like that. I think it may have been to a couple of review sites before us, as it appears to be missing a few PCI lanes, and also someone's left a cooler in it.
What?
There's a cooler just in the top, just chilling.
It doesn't come with the case, does it?
No. Who has had this case last? What a mess. Thankfully, if you guys buy this case, it won't be in this condition. Let me come back to you in a second when I've sorted this out. I do just want to clarify, I'm not actually that mad at anybody about this. Very lucky to test these products on like a loan basis from brands like ASUS, and it gives you an idea of what the tough cooler option is for this build. I don't think personally this is quite powerful enough for the 7800X3D, at least not in my use case. First impressions of the case though are genuinely very, very good. You've got these quick release sort of latches for the side panel, so if we pop the panel on, I can just demonstrate to you how it works. Little button on the side, push that in, and the panel dislodges. One thing I actually quite like is the panel doesn't just immediately fall off, as that would obviously be bad and happens on more chassis than you would think. Installing the motherboard into the chassis shouldn't be too tricky. Simply line the board up over all the standoffs, slide it in, and it should just sit of its own accord until you actually secure it down with 3 screws at the top, 3 along the middle, and 3 down the bottom. Don't leave it too long, as the board will fall free of its own accord if you don't go ahead and actually get this thing nicely tightened down. Once that's all done, the radiator, I think, is the next port of call. Looking at this mount, it is a removable bracket, meaning you can actually do the radiator install out the case and then drop it in, but I think it's going to be easier today to just add the radiator in with the bracket already in place. The fans are going to be on the underside of the rad, so I can still do those before moving it into the chassis, with a few screws just clamping it onto the top. That's going to provide plenty of exhaust ventilation, and I'll also be popping in some ASUS TUF branded fans for the bottom in intake mode. That should give us pretty neutral pressure, and maybe I'll also add just one fan at the back later on though to increase the overall airflow. Once that's done, the water block can sit right on top with some thermal paste and 4 thumb screws fastened down to secure that into place. All the cables and wiring can wait until later. And once all the casework is finally done, I can pop the GPU in. I'm very, very excited to add into place the TUF 4090. It's interesting, a couple of years ago, the TUF brand was like the cheap brand of cards and of course motherboards, but nowadays it's kind of a good value option that isn't rock bottom price. Let me just hover this into the case and see kind of where we're looking. Yeah, plenty of clearance. That fits in the case, no problems at all. Of course, to install this, there are a few things that need to be done. First of which is to remove this little cover just here. It spins open and doesn't remove completely before then taking out the second and third PCI lanes. We've got one just here and then another one down below it. Take out both of the screws. Keep hold of these as we'll need these to fasten the card in a moment. Remove your covers and then slide the card in, line it up, and you should get a satisfying click sound. It wasn't very satisfying, but I assure you it was there. Return into place the 2 screws that we were just using a moment ago. So here is, of course, the first one, and then, of course, the second one, like so. Flip the cover round, thumb screw on the top and a thumb screw on the bottom. Look at that. You'll also find a little included GPU support bracket, so that just slots into there and braces the graphics card into place. You can see here, that is going to prevent GPU sag and keep the whole thing pretty vertical. In order to finish this build off, I've picked up the ROG Thor 850 watt Platinum, a great unit with amazing efficiency ratings and of course a fully modular interface. If you want to do loads of overclocking, upgrade any of the components, I'd recommend a 1000 watt unit, and I'll link some great choices down below. For the sake of aesthetics, I'm also going to add in a couple of easy DIY fab cable extensions, which I'll pop down below once again, a very affordable way of adding a bit more wow factor to a build like this one. And that is looking pretty good. Apart from this adapter, which needs to be plugged in and hidden, it should look okay once it's hidden away or even swapped out eventually with a PCI Gen 5 alternative. For now though, it's time to boot this thing up, check out performance, but first, find out how good it looks with all the RGB, all the fans spinning, everything ready to go in the only way we know how. I'll see you in a second, but first, roll that montage.
Don't you go, straight along. Don't you go, straight along.
With performance in the bag then, it's time to see just how well this system stacks up in all of the latest titles. Now it goes without saying that a 4090 certainly isn't a card that lacks power, and the first game that really proves this is Warzone 2. At 4K high settings with DLSS on the performance preset, this build pulled in an impressive 147 frames per second on average. 90 and 99th percentile results were strong too, and the frame rate as ever was gathered using both MSI Afterburner's Riva Tuner and NVIDIA FrameView. Move through into Fortnite next up and drop things down to 1080p competitive settings to give an idea of performance on the other end of the spectrum, and the build once again performed with a whopping 345 FPS on average. Move through into Apex Legends at 4K high, and this was once again another game that showed just how powerful this system is. An average of 197 frames per second certainly isn't to be put to one side. Move through into games like Overwatch 2 and the results are once again amazing, 4K Ultra, and this time the build achieved 341 FPS on average, while titles like F1 2022 also stack up well. 4K on the ultra high preset with DLSS 3 enabled and ray tracing set to high, and this system achieved a stunning 194 FPS on average. This is a build that really means business and delivers range-topping performance for those of you with wallets deep enough to stomach its pretty immense price tag. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to drop a like rating, get subscribed, thanks for tuning in, and as always, we'll see you in the next one.